Hey everybody, it's Brandon from Slingshot Sports here, and today we're going to be talking about replacing and servicing some parts on your bar. Now this is a highly technical piece of equipment, and it is something that needs to be regularly serviced, just like your car engine, your bike, or any other piece of technical gear that you may have in your kit. Now today specifically, we're going to be talking about how to replace these flagging line PU tubes in case of excessive wear or some type of damage occurring to your bar. Now in this case, you can see there's two tubes here. One is the main power tube that holds the main line and the power of the system, and one holds the flagging line for the safety system of the tube. In this video, we are going to go ahead and be replacing the flagging line tube side. We'll be doing the power line tube in a separate video. So we're gonna need a few things. First and foremost is the Sentry bar in question. So we have the bar here, and we've go ahead and taken all the lines off the bar, which allows us easy access to all of the parts and pieces on the Sentry bar. We're also going to need the parts and pieces included in the Sentry bar flagging line tube replacement kit, which you don't need quite all of these pieces, you may not, but we do need the tube, some of the other plastic pieces, so you're gonna wanna have all the pieces that come with that kit. You're gonna need a utility knife or a sharp object knife of some sort. You may need a pair of needle nose pliers. I like to have a small Phillips or a small flathead screwdriver on hand in case I need to get into any little parts and pieces or picking knots apart. These work really great. I have a feeder line, and that's gonna come in handy later down the line. And then finally, I have some glue. And there are a couple types of glue that you can use for this piece here. I'm using Gorilla Super Glue Gel. It's not the expanding. It's basically Gorilla Glue's version of really strong super glue. You can also use Loctite 406 super glue. Both of those will work in this application, and we'll go over when you need to apply that glue and how to use it later on in the video. So now that we have all of our tools set aside and everything's here, let's go ahead and start getting into this project. The first thing I'm gonna wanna do is I'm gonna need to pull my flagging line out of the tube so that I can get the tube off. And the first part of that is to go ahead and undo this I-ring here. So I'm gonna go ahead and slide down the little plastic piece. I'm gonna open up my Lark's head knot in here. Again, some of this stuff might be tight. It depends on how much you've been using your bar. Once I create enough slack in this knot system, I'm gonna slide that loop over my I-bar ring, allowing me to remove the ring. I'm gonna set that to the side because I'm gonna be reinstalling that at the end. Next, I'm gonna pull off the safety ring. I can again set that to the side. We're gonna be using that later. And you see now that leaves my flagging line with nothing holding it in place. So what I'm gonna do is go up to the bar end pulley side here. I'm gonna pull my whole flagging line completely out of my flagging line tube so that it's just detached. It's still connected to the line and it's still through the pulley block, but it's fully disconnected and out of the tube. That's gonna be step number one. Step number two is you need to remove one end of the tube. Now both of these ends are actually glued in place in order to keep everything secure. So it really doesn't matter what side you cut off. I personally like to cut off this bottom side. I think it's a little bit easier. So go ahead and move your safety pin out of the way. You may want to open your release and just rotate your whole chicken loop completely out of the way of the part that you're dealing with. And you're gonna go ahead and grab this plastic flange here. We're gonna pull this thing up through the whole assembly so that we have it completely exposed. This is where my utility knife's gonna come in handy. I'm just gonna open this thing up. Careful not to cut yourself. And I'm just gonna go ahead and slice completely through. That's why the kit comes with a new tube that you're gonna use to replace that part. So now that I've removed this bottom flange, I can go ahead and pull the tube completely through the chicken loop. As you can see, it'll come through. I'm gonna set my chicken loop down over here. I'm gonna pull the tube completely through my bar. And what I'm gonna have left is I'm gonna have my tube that's still connected up here to my retention ring, which keeps it in place. Now this retention ring, there's a couple different things you can do here. You can try to push down these tabs and keep this piece. Me personally, I know that I have another one of these pieces in my kit that I'm gonna go ahead and replace it with. So I'm just gonna go ahead and break these tabs off. And I think that makes it really easy to get this piece off. So I'm gonna pry it up with my little screwdriver like this. I'm gonna take my needle nose pliers. I'm gonna get a grip on that tab. And I'm literally just gonna rock it back and forth until I can completely break it off of the system. And then I'm gonna jam whatever little excess is sticking up back down. And I'm gonna come over to the same thing on this side. You can see the little tab right here that keeps it in place. I'm gonna go ahead and get my screwdriver under there. I'm gonna pry it up like that. Take my needle nose plier. I'm gonna grab it. I'm gonna break it off. Again, if you really wanna save this piece, you can push those tabs down and remove that. Essentially, now that I have those tabs removed, you can see I can easily slide my retention ring off of the tube, and I can actually remove the whole tube from the system. Now this tube, because I did cut it, is actually not workable anymore. So these parts that you just removed can be set aside to be thrown away in the garbage for later. So I'm gonna open my flagging line kit, and I'm gonna dump out all the parts and pieces here. And what I have is I have one replacement flagging line. I have a new eye-bar ring. I have the 2 plastic retention pieces, and I have the replacement flagging line tube. Now, because I already have my eye ring and my bungee I've inspected is not very worn and damaged, I'm actually gonna keep this bungee and eye ring for later in case I ever wanna replace these parts later on in the life of the bar, and I'm gonna continue to use the ones that were on my bar as long as they're still in good shape. So step 1, pretty straightforward and easy. You can see it comes with the bottom piece pre-glued on the tube. So what I need to do is I need to grab my chicken loop, and I need to take the non-glued end of my tube, and I need to push it completely into my chicken loop and up through the unit so that the tube begins to come out of the top of the rotor head. And I'm just gonna go ahead and pull my whole tube until the flange is completely flush with the bottom of the chicken loop. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my tube, I'm gonna feed it through one of the holes on my Sentry bar, the actual bar, and make sure that there's no twists in these tubes, and making sure that the orientation of the tubes goes through the holes in the proper direction. Next, what I need to do is I need to take my flange, my 2 retention pieces. I'm gonna go ahead and put the retention ring onto the tube. I'm gonna go ahead and slide the other part of the retention ring through the stainless ring that's on my D-power block. And I'm gonna go ahead, slide the tube into the notch, and I'm gonna go and pull this retention ring up, and I'm gonna snap it in place. And once I snap that in place, it's gonna be locked in there. So make sure you have everything sorted and make sure everything looks straight and even before you snap that ring in place. Again, the tube is not glued in, so you could also take this and snap the retention ring on without the tube in there. Now you can see my new ring is in place with the flange pointing up so that my line can easily feed into the flange. And now all that's left to do is I just need to go ahead and glue my tube into place in this retention flange, making sure that it's nice and tight, fully inserted into the area, and then reflag my flagging line back through the piece. So let's go ahead and pull this out, get the glue ready, and we'll get everything set up and good to go. So I'm gonna open my tube of super glue. And remember guys, a little goes a long way here. On the directions for this glue, it says 1 drop per 1 square inch. So you probably don't need a whole lot of glue. The other thing to keep in mind is super glue dries really fast. So have all your parts and pieces laid out in the orientation that you want them laid out in, i.e. no twists or tubes. You're gonna apply a small amount of super glue to the end of the tube, covering the roughed up surface. You'll see on the end of the tube, it comes from the factory pre-sanded and roughed up. This is the gel version of super glue, so it's a little bit easier to work with, meaning it doesn't like run and slide. So I'm just gonna get a fair amount of glue on my tube, which I'm feeling pretty confident with right there. And I'm gonna go ahead and firmly insert the tube into the plastic flange, making sure I press the tube completely up into the plastic flange. And I'm just gonna hold it in place for about 10 seconds, making sure that the glue is covering all surfaces. I now feel confident that that is glued in place. I'm not gonna pull on it, but I'm gonna go ahead and set that down. My final step is I need to re-thread my flagging line tube back through my flagging line in order to get my system back to normal. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with a piece of extra line. So I'm gonna take my extra line, I'm gonna go ahead and feed it from the bottom of the flagging line tube where it comes out of the bottom of the chicken loop, and I'm just gonna push this line all the way through the tube until I see it pop out the top side. And the reason why this is this line is actually easier to feed through the tube than the bungee is. Okay, so you can see now I have my line coming all the way through the top. I'm going to take my flagging line bungee, making sure that I'm not crisscrossing or doing anything weird like rolling this around my D-pad. I don't want that. I want it to go straight to my flagging line. So once I've found that it's going straight to my flagging line, I'm gonna take my line that I just fed through, I'm gonna tie it onto the loop on the bottom of the bungee line, my flagging line here, and I use just a simple overhand knot here. Doesn't need to be anything super secure. And I'm gonna go ahead and pull this whole assembly all the way back down through the tube out of the bottom of the tube. Now you can see I'm gonna untie my knot in my line as I'm gonna need to reinstall my safety ring. So I slide that over the tube, and my I-ring. Again, the I-ring is a little retention device. I'm gonna slide it through one side of the I-ring. I'm gonna make a U in my line, slide it through the other side of my I-ring so that I end up with a shape like that. And then I'm gonna take the loop that I pulled through, I'm gonna put it completely around the I-ring, which secures the lark's head to the center post of this little ring, not on the edges. Notice the lark's head's on the center. And I'm gonna slide my retention plastic all the way up, flush against that knot so that everything sits down nice and tight. I'm gonna make sure that everything fits here. I'm gonna come back up to the top. I'm gonna make sure everything looks good here, that there's no twists or anything weird. I'm gonna go ahead and be careful with the super glue because it's still not quite dry. So you wanna make sure that you give this at least a half an hour of drying time before you take it into the water. Put my chicken loop back together, and my bar is completely now serviced, and everything is working as it should and brand new, ready to go to spec.